Sending positive vibes to all truth seekers. Welcome to the Library of Humanity vodcast. Today, I'm feeling pretty good, so we're going to talk about happiness. What is happiness and how to be more happy? I've been thinking about happiness and how to be more happy probably for the last 5-6 years of my life, since college basically. Since I majored in philosophy in college, I really wanted to figure out how to be as happy as possible. And I've kind of learned that there's different ways to think about happiness. So what's one way to think about happiness, if it, from your perspective, is like it's coming and going all of the time. Since we believe that we are this person, that society has told us that we are this person, since we're living from that reality, that level of, or realm of like personal me-ness, I am me, that machine or that entity is in flux between happiness and suffering. And it's really hard to get away from that, because our society is set up, and human beings are actually set up for that to occur, that there's this up and down in everyday life. And the reason for that is because we are searching for happiness. First, let's just start there. We are searching for it. We're searching for it. And it's in the Declaration of Independence of the United States. It says that we have the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, or the search of happiness. So what does that really mean, searching for happiness? That means that we're looking for something or someone or some event outside of us. I'm looking for it out there. And so we're actually relying on our happiness for something that we can't control. Let me repeat that. We're relying on our happiness from something that we can't control, because we can't control the outside world at all. And so the nature of the outside world, or the outside world meaning like society and nature and your health, even your health, because your health is like how your body interacts, how your body and your brain interacts with the environment. That is a constant up and down of happiness and suffering, happiness and suffering, happy and suffering. And so that is kind of the nature of being a human, or living in a society. So because even society is looking for happiness outside of itself. And so that is going to it's going to make you not be as happy as possible, because you want to figure out how to be permanently happy, right? The goal is to figure out how to be permanently happy. And so it should be like a state of being. Happiness needs to be a state of being that is beyond this duality between suffering and happiness. Because we really, what the human being is searching for is less suffering and more happiness. That is probably the basic law of being a human, is searching for less suffering and more happiness. And actually that search is actually called samsara, which is a word from Buddhism and Hinduism. But the idea is that translates into suffering. So actually this up and down, this fluctuation between up and down in life is actually what suffering is. It's not just suffering and then I'm not suffering when I'm happy. Actually, the entire process of up and down is suffering. So you want to be able to go beyond that. And actually, how to do that is actually going deeper inside of what is here all of the time. Figuring out whether I'm dreaming or sleeping or tired or really alive. Whatever is always there is where we need to live from. So being permanently happy means we have to be living from the thing, which is I am, all of the time. So the sense of I am is the center of your entire life. Because every thought you do, it's like, I do this, I said that, I went there. So the sense of I am, is the center of everything that we're doing. Everything that we're doing. And so we need to be able to live from there. Because if not, then again, we're searching for these things and phenomena and people, and we give them our free will to choose our happiness for us, because we are taking away our dignity, basically, by placing our reliability on others to make us happy, other people and other things. And that's kind of the materialist way to live, is you're placing your happiness in materials, which includes other people. And that's might be why some of our relationships are so unhealthy, is we're expecting other people to make us happier, because we don't recognize that the I am is actually the source of ultimate happiness. So because we don't recognize that, that's why we're trying to rely on other people to give us happiness, and rely on other things to give us happiness. But one of the negative parts about putting your happiness into other things is this idea of normalization. So normalization is kind of a concept in psychology when a new situation seems cool and you feel happy in a new situation, but that new situation becomes normal. So if you imagine like the first 6 months that you went to college, for example, the first 6 months seemed new. Actually, the first 3 months seemed very new, and then the next 3 months seemed semi-new. And then by that 6th month, now college is very normal. So that's why the first 3 months were very, very fun and new, because it was all novel and interesting. And the next 3 months were kind of a struggle, because it was so new for a long time, and that now it's starting to become normal. And so because we wanted college to remain in that happiness state all of the time, which is impossible, because whenever you're putting your happiness on something on the outside, it's going to not become new anymore after those 6 months or after those 3 months. So, and right when something becomes normal, it no longer makes you happy, because it's like, for a while it was filling this ball. Just pretend that you have a ball in your chest that can be filled with material things for a while, but every 6 months that gets flushed out. Just kind of imagine that. So like, you buy a new car, and that material thing fills the hole for a while, but then it flushes out after 6 months, and that's the normalization process. So it's like there's this empty hole in our chest that we're looking for to fill all the time. But it's like your stomach, where you constantly need more and more food. So you always need to be eating more and more materials, consuming more and more materials to fill that void, that empty space in your chest that requires to digest all of this material and happiness. But that is not the way to be ultimately and permanently happy. Okay, but just imagine. But before we do this, it seems like most people, I don't know what percentage, definitely a majority of people are, well, first of all, they're taught, and because they're taught that they believe that happiness is to be attained by searching for it on the outside. And our society, like the Western society, teaches us this, that happiness is to be found outside by achievement and doing and having. So it's all about doing and having, and so happiness is actually seen as the goal or the end point. So like by doing, so doing would be the medium, or the way. So doing is the way to this ultimate goal of happiness, or having things. And actually, when you do things, then you have things, kind of in our society, right? So you go to work and then you get money to have materials. So it's like this unending process of doing and then having, doing and then having, doing and having. And it's believed by most people in our society that is the process to gain happiness. However, we believe that happiness is like this attainable thing in the end, but it's actually never reached as long as you're doing this running in circles by doing and then having, doing and having. So it's never actually attained, because happiness, the way that most people define it, is kind of like trying to hold water in your hand or sand in your hand, and it just falls right through the spaces between your fingers. So it's actually impossible to hold for a long time in the way that most people define happiness. So that's kind of our desire, is we want to hold all of this happiness by the process of doing and having. But that search, again, is not going to work because of that normalization process. But it's also not going to work because when you have this mindset, you see that the way you see humans and people is so that you can use them for your benefit. So in that mindset, you're like, oh, how can I manipulate this person into making me more happy? Or like, but it's kind of a short-sighted view of happiness. It's not this permanent state of being that I'm kind of advocating, like that's how we need to start defining happiness in that way, or thinking about happiness in that way, as this permanent state of being in your personhood. However, we're seeing that happiness can only be attained by manipulating the system. That's kind of how we're taught. And the only way to have more is that someone has less. Not completely, but that's just a general rule. If you're kind of a capitalist, you might disagree with that. But if you think about happiness out there in society, it's actually kind of a zero-sum game in the way that we're defining happiness normally. Is that because our society is based on inequality. Inequality is the basis for some people to have material goods, therefore being happy, and other people to have less material goods, therefore unhappy. So we believe, again, that materials are the road to this end point of happiness. But that cycle, we need to go beyond that cycle and see, where is this cycle happening inside of? And that cycle is happening inside of our conscious I am, kind of this normal state of I exist. It's the most normal state. It's just that we never place our attention there. We never go towards this I am awareness. So we think that it's so normal and regular and boring because we're looking for happiness out here. So like out here, this is the interesting stuff. Is like shoes, clothes, cars, the other sex, power, prestige. All of this is what interests us. And actually, if you think about it, because Western civilization has introduced so much technology in our lives, we're searching for happiness through these technological means. And because of that, we're losing our ability to pay attention and our attention spans are crap, less than 2 seconds. If you watch people today, if you walk to a restaurant, for example, and you're waiting in line, as soon as waiting happens, people just pull out their phone like this. As soon as there's any sort of waiting. And now you're seen as kind of the weird one if you're waiting in line and you're just waiting. And you're just kind of maybe with a nice smile on your face and just kind of waiting and looking around and seeing kind of this conscious field of aliveness. It's very, very beautiful. Just kind of observing the aliveness of your life. And it's actually not your life, it's the life. It's not had by anybody. This living awareness is actually this awareness is what we all share. And we don't share materials. This chair that I'm sitting on is not shared by everybody. But what is shared is the experience of these things, but not the things themselves. It's the awareness and aliveness is like this field that I'm existing inside of, the chair is existing inside of, and you are existing inside of. That's what this video is existing inside of. And it's actually not even inside, it's actually that these things, their essence is aliveness. And it's not just, aliveness is not just for animals, plants, and humans. It's actually for every moment and all the environment, your entire conscious awareness of this, all of this in front of you, all of this that you can sense. So again, your five senses. The reason why we have our five senses is that we can potentially, I disagree with this ultimately, but the idea with the senses is that we're getting to this outside world. And knowing the outside world, the purpose of that is to increase happiness and decrease suffering. So again, that is the purpose of a lot of human life, is to increase this happiness and decrease this suffering. But that is tough, because that is the nature of the outside world. That's the nature of humans trying to find happiness out there. But this conscious here-ness, this conscious awareness that's here and now, but it's like perpetually here and perpetually now, meaning it's always here and it's always now, and it's always experience. So this awareness is always here when you're awake. It's always here when you have a lot of energy. It's always here when you're tired. It's always here when you're going to bed. It's always here when you're dreaming. So your dream state, whatever that is, it's mind, right? Dream is kind of like mind. You could think of it that way. But actually everything is dream and mind. Even the awake state, I would argue, is mind stuff. But dreams for sure, if we think about it that way. But that mind stuff of dreams is happening inside of awareness or aliveness or consciousness. So that's why mind is not the same as consciousness, conscious awareness. And that's why the mind is different than the I am. Because the I am, or the sense of that, is how we interpret consciousness. So consciousness, I don't want to get too into that, because this video is more about happiness, but everything is relevant. Absolutely everything is relevant for every topic. Like, you can't talk about history without talking about biology. You can't talk about physics without talking about religion. It's all intertwined, every single subject. That's why knowledge is more like a web. Knowledge is not like this. It's not like a step-by-step process. But school teaches us that, because we go through these curriculums at school that says, all right, first you learn A, then you learn B, and because you know A and B, now you can learn C, and because you know A, B, and C, now you can learn D. But again, that's not how knowledge works. It's more like a web. So that's why talking about happiness, actually happiness is it's like this center of all of our lives, because it is kind of it's like the avenue that we ride on to live, is this happiness state. Happiness is like, that sense of happiness is what motivates us to do in life. So happiness is, because we're always on the verge of suffering, and we're always on the verge of happiness. We're like always riding this middle point between falling on the fence, if you're standing on a fence and you're falling one way to suffering and one way to happiness. We're kind of always on the top of that fence like Humpty Dumpty. So if you know the Humpty Dumpty story, he sat on a wall and he could, I don't know if this is exactly the story, but he could fall on either side. And that's kind of like you and your well-being, and that's the homeostasis point. The homeostasis point is falling towards happiness or falling into suffering. We actually never fully fall to either side. So we never fully experience suffering, and we never fully experience the happiness because those are so far on opposite sides of the spectrum, and we're normally here. So, and the reason why I'm talking about this spectrum is because this is how most people believe happiness is this other side of what suffering is. Because we assume that happiness is good and suffering is bad. So like kind of all spectrums, we think that one side of the spectrum is good and the other side of the spectrum is bad. But actually both are neither good nor bad, because you need suffering to be happy. Okay, so now we're kind of at this point where because happiness and suffering are on a spectrum, you need suffering to be happy. Okay, so because it's a spectrum, you can't just have happiness. Otherwise, it just wouldn't exist. Happiness wouldn't exist because you need this back and forth of suffering and happiness, suffering and happiness. You need that in order to even experience happiness. Another way to think about that is when you go to a really mountainous place, I used to live in Ecuador for a year and a half, and I lived in the Andes Mountains. And in the Andes Mountains, a lot of the peaks are very, very high, but then you go to a valley, like the city of Quito, where I lived. Quito is in this valley, and then the volcano Pichincha is right above it. I would definitely advocate people to go to Quito, Pichincha. Those are in the middle of Ecuador. It's a beautiful country, and you can learn your Spanish there. Spanish is very fun to speak. I used to be fluent. I'm no longer fluent, but you can definitely comment in Spanish on this channel if you want, because I can read Spanish and I can reply in Spanish. But my speaking is just not that good anymore. But anyways, so in a mountainous place, you have a mountain and you have a valley, and one exists because the other exists. So you can't just have peaks. So if you imagine that like all of the Earth's surface was mountain peaks, it would just be the flat land. That's why everything is standardized, and it depends, and that standard depends on something that's worse or better than it. That's why, so for example, the photos on Instagram are becoming more and more beautiful, because the standard is always improving and improving, because there are fewer ugly photos to compare it with. So because there's more and more beautiful photos, your photo has to be extremely beautiful now for anybody to pay attention to it. And that's exactly how mountains and valleys work, that you can't just have a valley without a mountain, because that would just be the flat land. You can't have the peak of the mountain, because that would just be flat. You can't only have the peak of the mountains, because that would also be the flat lands. So that's why everything is relative. So happiness is relative and dependent on suffering, and suffering is relative and dependent on happiness. But, so, now that you know about this yin-yang between suffering and happiness, you can't have one without the other. When you study Taoism, is this yin-yang, how to experience that fully, is seeing it as one, collapsing into oneness. So suffering and happiness are not separate, they are one. And that is the key to living through a permanent state of happiness, is you allow anything in to your conscious awareness. You fully accept it. So when happiness is knocking at your door, you open the door and you allow it in, and you offer happiness a cup of tea. When suffering is knocking at your door, you open the door, you say hello, you allow it to come sit on your couch, and you offer it a cup of coffee, right? And you see that happiness and suffering, happiness is no better than suffering because it's just its brother or its sister. They're completely inherently related. They're like twins. That's why you can't even really tell the difference between them when you are in this like permanent state of living from the natural state of infinite awareness, or this field of I am, or this field of it is, or this field of God. You could call it God if you want, but it's more like a experience. It's just pure experience. And when you're living from this pure experience, happiness and suffering is happening inside of it. And it's actually a non-attachment to them. So the key to not being attached to suffering is not being attached to happiness either. Because too many of us are, because we're focused so much on happiness, when we have suffering, we're very focused on suffering too. And the reason why that is because they're actually the same thing. Happiness and suffering are actually the same thing. So, but again, we give the label happiness good and the label of suffering bad. And so that's why we're living in this up and down state. And well, to go, and again, going beyond that is seeing that they're no different than each other. So you're just being aware of happiness, and you're just being aware of suffering, and that really is the ultimate key. And as you can see, this is very tied to meditation and to self-inquiry, and just being here and now all of the time, and just seeing that happiness is not good and suffering is not bad. It's actually, happiness just is the way it is, and suffering just is the way it is. Because suffering is bad is only because we label it as such. Because we label suffering as suffering, it's because when we start suffering, we give it a word. We're like, oh, this is suffering, or this is bad. But when we give it that word, that's the only reason why suffering actually exists, is because you label it. Same thing with happiness. So because we think happiness is good, we label it as happiness, we label it as good, and now it's good and now it's happy. But when you don't label it, you avoid the label, just don't give it the word happiness. Just try to avoid, when you're having this happiness state, just try to be here, right? For example, I can hear this noise. They might be coming in this room, but no, they're not coming in this room. But so when there's distractions, for example, no, I think that's a different room. So when there's distractions like this, right? Like I planned on coming in this room because I had expectations. I had expectations like I'm gonna come in this room. It's gonna be very quiet. I'm gonna have no distractions. I'm gonna film this great video, and it's gonna go really well. Those are called expectations. The key to being happy is having no expectations for the future. The future is just the way that it is. The future happens because it was always planned to happen that way by the ultimate free will. The ultimate free will is the infinite intelligence, infinite awareness, infinite intelligence that is creating every moment right now. Every moment is created. It's like every moment is its own mini big bang. And that big bang occurs from this infinite creating, this infinite creating that comes from the infinite, whatever that is for you. And so, and that's another key to happiness, is to have no expectations for the future. What creates these expectations, for example, this noise coming here kind of distracting my video, for example, is that I'm not really labeling it as bad. If you can rewind the video and kind of watch me reacting to that noise. It's I'm just observing it, and I'm just kind of being here and now in the moment, and I'll react to it if I need to, right? If the janitor had opened the door and came in, I would have had to talk to them and say, hey, I'm just recording a video here. Can you come back later, for example? And I would have needed to do that and maybe just pause the video and recorded a new one, or just I would have cut it at that point, and the video would have only been half done, which has happened to me before, where my videos cut out because I have this low technology. I just have my phone. I don't have enough money to invest in my YouTube channel yet, but once I have my full-time job, I'm going to invest more financial resources into this, because those financial resources might help me reach other people by having a nice microphone, by having a nice video recorder, camera, excuse me. Those are kind of the resources that can be used to open up my message to reach out to more people. However, that's just not the case right now, and that's totally fine. It's actually supposed to happen that way because it was chosen by something that isn't me. My entire life, see, Kyle, like me, I think that I'm doing all of these things. Like, I think I'm sitting down and making this video, right? But in moments like these, where I feel very mindful and kind of living from this infinite awareness, though, that's very telling, and it demonstrates to me that there is this ultimate chooser, this ultimate creator that's creating the moments, creating each moment as special, and that's what I'm reacting. That's what I'm opening up myself to. So another key to happiness is opening up yourself to this infinite creator that is creating every moment. And you don't know, the me here, doesn't know the reason why something happens. It's impossible for the me to know that. Why infinity is happening, why infinity is doing what infinity is doing. That's just a question. That's just a philosophical question that we ask. And that's why I love philosophy, is I love asking those types of questions. But it's actually not possible to answer using human tools like words and science. You can't know why infinity does what infinity does using science and words. And the only way to do that is by letting go and opening up your consciousness, opening up your awareness to this beautiful environment that goes on forever. Because existence doesn't end at your visual horizon or your audio horizon. There's existence out there. It's existing as nothingness right now because you're not aware of it now, but it's like this infinite expansive existence or being. And it's existing as nothing, no thingness right now, but it is just this infinite isness or being. And that's ultimately what gives us this permanent happiness, by sitting here as that, not as me. So living from the me is, again, this up and down, happy, suffering, happy, suffering, happy, suffering. But by just opening yourself up to this infinite realm of here, now, then happiness is easy and suffering is easy, because you're not really labeling happiness as happiness. You're not labeling suffering as suffering. And you're just it's just being. And being itself being is inherently blissful. So, or joyful, but really more bliss. So you think like happiness is good, but just allowing being is like happiness to the infinite, equate, or what would that be? To the power of infinity. I can't remember, exponent, to the exponent of infinity. So you take happiness to the infinite exponent, and that's what bliss, that's what being and bliss is. As you take your happiness moment as me, and then you times that by infinity, and that's what the nature of being is. So the nature of being is just inherently bliss. And that's ultimately what guides our life, but we just don't know that. We think that we guide our life. We think that we are pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. We think that we are choosing the outcomes of our life. But actually we're a slave to that. We're a slave to that free will that we believe that we are. And believing in that free will, we're attaching ourselves to our minds and our inner voices. And that inner dialogue, that inner voice in your head is actually the master, and you and your happiness is the slave. And that's actually what the ego wants. The ego wants to be the master of your happiness. So that's why everything is tied. All of this is tied together. Ego, meditation, happiness, infinity, all of this is completely tied together. So if you have questions about happiness and how to be more happy, comment below. If you like this video, you can like it down below. I'm going to post this on my Library of Humanity podcast. So I will see you all next time. Peace, love, and bliss. Peace.